Hey everybody, welcome to the 99 Pages Book Club. This is Rajiv Srinivasan, the moderator, broadcasting live from South Lake Tahoe, California, the reading capital of the world. Today we are talking to Thomas Spence, president of Regnery Publishing. So following the Capitol riots in DC, two major events happened in publishing. First, Simon & Schuster decided to pull publication of Missouri Senator Josh Hawley's book, The Tyranny of Big Tech, citing his participation in fueling the riots through voting against election certification. Secondly, 500 publishing professionals co-signed a letter, No Book Deals for Traitors, committing to denying book deals to former members of the Trump administration. Mr. Spence of Regnery raised his hand and actually picked up, and he's now publishing Senator Hawley's book. And he is also speaking out actively against these publishing houses who've signed the letter denying book deals to former Trump members of the Trump administration. And he did so with a very informative and inspiring op-ed in the Wall Street Journal called Blacklists Are the Rage in Publishing. As a big fan and advocate of reading and the marketplace of ideas, I had to invite Mr. Spence to 99 Pages for a community discussion on, of course, his decision to pick up Senator Hawley's book, but also how we are to maintain free and safe speech in a divided nation. I value your judgment, and I can hope that you participate. We do have our live chat going, but first I'd love to welcome Mr. Spence. Thank you for being on 99 Pages today. We really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, Rajiv. Happy to be
All
here.
right. Thank you. All right. So let's start with your op-ed in the Wall Street Journal in response to the open letter, No Book Deals for Traitors. What is blacklisting? Why this word choice? Where did it come from? And why is this letter a form of blacklisting?
I would I should look it up, find out the history of the word. I confess I haven't done that. But I mean, most people know the word blacklisting in connection with the McCarthy era, and particularly in Hollywood at that time. Blacklisting, I would define it as refusing to give a platform or silencing somebody because of his affiliation, political affiliations, philosophical affiliations, whatever. It's not even objecting to what the person is going to say or has said. It's saying, you are a member of X, and therefore you have no right to speak, or we're not interested in what you might say. We think you have nothing of value to say, just because of who you are. And I think it's a deeply anti-intellectual stance to take, and deeply un-American. And until quite recently, most Americans would have said, of course it's un-American, and liberals more than anybody. But anyway, that's what I mean when I talked about protested against blacklisting in that op-ed.
Very interesting. And so, you got lots of attention for picking up specifically Senator Josh Hawley's book, The Tyranny of Big Tech, following Simon & Schuster's canceling it. So, you're a professional publishing executive. So as a businessman, let's start with this. What are the elements of a book that you need to see or not see in order to fight for it? Like, what is it about Senator Hawley's book that said, you know what, I don't care that Simon & Schuster canceled it, I'm going to go fight for it?
Yeah, well, as you said in describing me, I'm a businessman, and Regnery is a for-profit publisher. There are not-for-profit publishers, lots of them, and their criteria differ in certain ways from ours. But Regnery has a mission, however, and we're a conservative nonfiction publisher, basically. But the mission, as I see it, is to publish the truth. Publish books with important things to say that people need to hear. And I think Regnery's especially important for publishing people that might not be published elsewhere. But we do have to make money doing this. so we always look at, is anybody going to buy this book? So when I evaluate a proposal, the first thing I want to know is this interesting? Is there anything compelling that the author has to say? Is this a book that deserves to be published? I think probably 99% of the books that are published anymore don't meet that criterion, actually. But anyway, is it worth publishing? And then we have to ask the next question: and if we publish it, can we sell it? Is anybody going to buy this thing? And I mean, not every book proposal is the same product as we're looking at it, because some are going to be fairly inexpensive for us to acquire, and others will be more expensive for us to acquire. So, the more you pay for it, the more you need to sell. A lot of guesswork involved at that point.
Absolutely.
But, with Senator Hawley's book, we have been excoriated and praised by different people for taking that book. But some of my friends have said, "Oh, you're so courageous to publish that book." And I say, "Well, thank you very much. But I think we're going to sell a lot of copies of that book."
So what's interesting is that in your description, your identity as a businessman, you are looking at a cost-benefit ratio when you undertake a project. But let's say, let's run a hypothetical example, and just forgive me for laying out some assumptions. But let's say that the book is of high quality, and the sales prospects are also high. So from a business case, it would make sense to publish this book, and it looks like it would make good sense. Is there anything, and actually we had Chelsea Jacobs asked a question here, under those circumstances, is there anything that you wouldn't publish? Is there anything that an author can do to sort of undermine that business case outside of what's actually written in the book?
Yes, absolutely. I should back up and say I don't have a quarrel with Simon & Schuster's right, not to publish Senator Hawley's book. Now, they had a contract with him, and that's between them and Senator Hawley, whether their contract allowed them to get out of it, and I don't know. But apart from that, they're a private business. They can publish anybody they want. I think that their stated reasons for canceling that book were not convincing. I would say they're not compelling. But for Regnery, we first of all, we have a publishing mission. Unlike Simon & Schuster publishes books on virtually everything, right? Regnery's small. We do books on conservative nonfiction, pretty broadly confined, defined. And I'm actually always particularly interested in finding books not by somebody who does not identify as a that's another. We can talk about that later. But if somebody has written a book on auto repair, that's not going to be for us. There's a lot of subjects that just are outside of our publishing mission. I guess what Ms. Jacobs is asking, though, is there some body that we would not publish? And sure, there are some people that are so, objectionable, nasty people that we don't want to be associated with them, even if they would have something interesting to say. Hard to say how often something like that comes across my desk. Pretty rarely. But to be honest, though, we will get proposals by people who are maybe borderline respectable, and again, it's respectable to different audiences, right? So somebody that I find respectable may be thoroughly disreputable to somebody else, and vice versa. But there are people we think, kind of comes pretty close to crossing the line on certain values or principles that we hold, and we get way more proposals than we can accept, so we'll generally not go there with those.
So I want to double click on this, but I feel like there's actually another let's call it a prerequisite question that we need to answer, which is, what does it actually mean to publish a book or distribute a book? And especially in an ebook, audiobook world, why does it even matter whether, like, why don't all these authors just go self-publish? Like, what value does a publisher add in the first place?
Right, a publisher adds tremendous value, Rajiv. Yeah, but that's a really good question these days, because the lines are, as I was saying to you before we went on, everything has changed in publishing. But basically, there's an important distinction between publishing and distribution. So a publisher takes a manuscript that somebody has written, generally edits it, tries to tidy it up, improve it. The edits may go from just minor polishing to a complete rewrite, and everything in between. But the first thing the publisher adds is literary judgment and also commercial judgment, whatever, to shape the manuscript, shape the text of the book. Then the publisher turns it into, one of these things, something that's printed on paper. And then I suppose what the word publish literally means is to put it out there for the public. And that's the last step, the hardest step, selling this thing, this collection of pages that you've printed. At that point, distribution kicks in. So we send our digital files off to a printer, and a few weeks later, miraculously, printed books come back. And well, what do we do with these things? So if you're a large company, you can, well, even small ones can do it. You can distribute them yourselves, but somebody's got to get those books to Amazon's warehouse, to Barnes and Noble's warehouse, and to any other place in the trade where they're going to be sold, and out of the trade, outside the trade. So that's handled by a distributor. Smaller publishers like Regnery generally don't handle their own distribution. We don't have our own warehouse and so forth. And I think all of the big 5 New York publishing houses also run a distribution service. So Simon & Schuster, for example, is warehousing, shipping, and selling all of it, millions of books. They do it for others as well, other smaller publishers, and we're one of their clients.
It should be noted that despite them canceling the publication of the book, they are still distributing it. And I find that very confusing, because on the other hand, we heard on Friday that Simon & Schuster actually decided to cancel its distribution relationship with Officer Mattingly, the murderer of Breonna Taylor, who decided he wanted to publish a book. And so it seems like their distribution arm does take an active stance or a principled stance on what it will and will not distribute. So how do you interpret the gesture that they decided not to cancel the distribution contract with Hawley's book?
The development from last week with the book that you just referred to, the Mattingly, that's his name, right?
Yes, sir.
That had caught everybody's attention, because that is very new, and everyone is, especially those of us who are Simon & Schuster clients, are trying to figure out what that means. Because, when it was just a coincidence that Senator Hawley's book was canceled by Simon & Schuster, we picked it up, and we happened to be a distribution client of Simon & Schuster. Simon & Schuster didn't know anything about our picking up that book, had nothing to do with it. And distribution is for them, pretty much a passive, sorry to say a passive activity. That seems like a contradiction, but it's a passive enterprise. They're not choosing the books that they distribute. And when we signed up Senator Hawley's book, it occurred to us, Simon & Schuster just canceled publication of this book. Might we have a problem? And so we went back and looked at our contract, our distribution contract. I mean, as I recall, I haven't looked at it in several weeks now, but as I recall, it's never explicitly addressed in the contract whether they can pick and choose the titles that they will distribute. But we thought it was pretty clear from this contract that they can't do that.
Okay.
They don't.
That's
they
helpful.
don't have the right under the contract to say, oh yeah, we'll distribute this one, but not this one. No one would sign up for them if that were in the, because you can't. Your distribution can't be, a title by title roll of the dice. So, but we did. I talked to some other people who run other conservative publishing houses who, like us, have, are distributed by somebody else, and we're all asking, well, what are the chances that that Simon or one of the other distributors might not distribute this book, might not let us sell it?
Mattingly's publisher is Post Hill, and I presume their distribution contract is not unlike yours. So it'd be an interesting question to see how Simon & Schuster got out of that.
I don't know how they did. Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead, sir. I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, I'm guessing their contract is the same as ours, but I don't actually know. But Simon decided that, and this was a decision not made at the level of their distribution, the people who run the distribution company. It was made division. It was made at the highest level, and they decided, I suppose, that it was worth the cost of breaking that contract, if that's in fact what they're doing, were less than the problems they would have otherwise.
So we have quite a few questions coming in from the audience, specifically on the topic of publishing. I do want to make sure we get onto more topics of free speech more broadly, but I want to start off with Shankar Venkatraman. He asked, is there any book that you've published that you've regretted doing for non-business reasons?
For non-business reasons, yeah. I can't think of any, but if he means regret, meaning one that I'm ashamed of, I've only been at Regnery for 8 years. So what they published in the many years before that, I can't answer for. We published a lot of books, but I'm not aware of any that I would regret in that sense. There have been books. I've been the publisher, which is the boss at a publishing house, for a little over a year. And it's generally a big headache. I used to be an editor. I loved that job. But one advantage of being the publisher is basically it's up to me in the end, yes or no, whether we're publishing a particular book. When I was an editor, I was working on acquisitions, and we would take books that I would regret in the sense that I thought, well, that book doesn't have that much worthwhile to say. Not very often, but
okay.
Anyway,
Yeah,
I'm sorry, I'm rambling, but the answer is no. I think.
Well, Ms. Judy Bello actually, I think, suggests a very interesting follow-up, and I mean, especially if if your end customer is the reader, and the reader wants a credible publisher, and they're effectively paying you for the scrutiny that you're applying to these books as they go through the publication process. Well, if Senator Hawley embraces this, this untruth that the president is still, or President Trump was pursuing, that he actually won the election, this election was stolen. I mean, there really wasn't much evidence for it. And, giving Senator Hawley a platform that is kind of, especially rooted now in this kind of his not voting to certify the election, like, doesn't elevating someone like that who's like very actively promoting this idea that the election was a sham, there's all these fraud going on, that doesn't really have much of there's not a lot of evidence to support that, doesn't that undermine the credibility of your publishing house, like by putting someone like that who's so vocally promoting an untruth? Like, doesn't that undermine your credibility as a publishing house?
If your description of Senator Hawley if the description that you just gave of Senator Hawley were correct, I would say yes, it would discredit us. I think that that description of Senator Hawley and the description of what he did is grossly inaccurate. I know lots of people disagree. Senator Hawley has never said that the election was stolen or that Donald Trump ought still to be sitting at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. He exercised his constitutional right as a senator to challenge the electoral vote of Pennsylvania because of what he judged to be strong evidence of irregularities in the voting in Pennsylvania. This was a year of electoral chaos, and no one denies that on the left or the right because of the pandemic. And Democratic senators and congressmen have challenged the electoral vote of particular states in previous elections. 2000, and they did it in 2017. They did it 4 years before that. 4 years before that. Senator Hawley. I strongly disagree with the view that he was perpetuating a lie, the lie that Donald Trump won the election, and B, that he had anything to do with the lawless mob that invaded the Capitol on January the 6th. And immediately after order had been restored, immediately after the riot, he delivered an impassioned condemnation of what had just happened. So I am perfectly comfortable, and so yeah, I have no problem publishing Senator Hawley, and I think the book that he's written is on a very important topic, anyway. So yeah,
absolutely, yeah, no doubt about it. The book has nothing to do with the election. The book is about the quote unquote tyranny of big tech, which I think absolutely has merit. I'd love to just kind of keep moving on. We got some other interesting topics, and one thing that strikes me as problematic with Senator Hawley's, let's just call it behavior, is that, well, let's just put it this way: protecting free speech in our country right now is really reliant on a handful of case law that really defines what is and is not protected speech. And according to one of the more famous cases, Brandenburg v. Ohio, protected speech, or rather unprotected speech, is speech that either A, is considered reckless or malicious, or B, causes imminent lawless action. Those two categories are unprotected speech. Is it not reasonable to interpret that someone even claiming that election fraud would happen in no matter how isolated the incident in Pennsylvania, like, is that not reckless for a United States senator to do that, particularly without substantial evidence? And we saw imminent lawless action, come of it, even though it may not. Like, I guess, what is the standard then? What does reckless and malicious speech mean to you? And what is now, like, how directly correlated does it have to be with imminent lawless action for it to actually not be protected speech, in your opinion?
I'm not aware that Brandenburg versus Ohio talks about reckless and malicious speech. The holding of Brandenburg versus Ohio is that speech can be prohibited if it is, quote, directed at inciting or producing imminent lawless action and is, quote, likely to incite or produce such action. I think that Senator Hawley's objection to the electoral vote of Pennsylvania on January the 6th doesn't come within a mile of meeting that definition. So, yeah, I mean, there are, let's just say, this past summer, you could come up with lots of examples of public figures, politicians, saying pretty incendiary things, just as several American cities were, being ravaged by riot. And no one is talking about the connection between what they said, I think, is much closer than no one who invaded the Capitol on January did so because of Josh Hawley's view of the electoral irregularities in Pennsylvania. There is simply no connection. It's ridiculous to say there is. So, no problem.
That's awesome. And to be honest, I actually tend to agree with you specifically on the Hawley case. If you actually read both his letters, his press releases, it's not overtly, it's definitely not an explicit call to action, call to arms. This election was stolen, but it's almost a little opportunistic, though. There's definitely some political calculation going on, which I think I actually, believe it. I mean, absolutely. He sees what Trump is doing. He sees the riots happening. I mean, and I think it's really interesting to sort of analyze the behavior of a politician in the context of both their legal responsibilities and the legal frameworks of protected free speech, but also it's the business of politics, right? It's part of, political culture right now, which I think leads me to my next question. And this is a term that I really wanted to talk to you about, which is cancel culture. Which when I read the no book deals for traders, this is kind of the word that kind of hit me hard. Was like, I mean, if a Trump official worked in the United States government for 4 years and they have something to say, a person with a seat of authority, in my opinion, regardless of their ideology or how crazy their ideas may be, I personally, would believe everybody has a seat at the table. But we see this happening more and more with the cancel culture. It's a term we hear a lot about these days. So you as a media executive, this is your daily business. What is cancel culture to you? And how does this affect your strategy as a businessman? Because if your authors are part of the ones getting canceled, doesn't that affect your bottom line? Like, to what extent do you need to embrace some of this in order to sell books?
There's a lot of things to respond to.
Yeah, I know, right?
I draw a distinction myself, whether it's important or not, people can judge, but between cancel culture and blacklist. I would say that Simon & Schuster's cancellation of Josh Hawley's book, I point to that as an example of the cancel culture. The open letter from 500 publishing professionals saying that no one who was part of the Trump administration should ever be given a book contract. I call that blacklist. That's saying we don't care what you're saying, and we don't who you are or whom you're affiliated with disqualifies you from speaking in public. And I think that's a slightly different thing. We worry about and I think that is completely appalling. I was not a Trump fan, right? He was my 16th choice of the 16 Republicans running for president in 2016. But living here in Washington, working on Capitol Hill, I have many friends, many close friends who went into the Trump administration, several at the highest level. These are people of enormous integrity, sterling values. These are people who were there to serve put up with tons of just, if you'll forgive me, crap, to give that public service, gave up, in many cases, lots of income to serve for those 2, 3, 4 years. And the Trump administration, like any presidential administration, is made up of thousands of people who are there for all kinds of reasons. I'm sure there were plenty of bums in the Trump administration, as there are in the Biden administration and as there were in the Lincoln administration. And there are some wonderful people as well. And to say, because you worked for Donald Trump, you are unclean and you cannot say anything in public. That is despicable. That is dangerous and un-American. I hate it. Now back to the cancel culture. Up to a point, it's a great thing for Regnery, because it's, as I said to some people after we acquired the Josh Hawley book, I said, that was a pretty easy decision to take that book, because Simon and Schuster had just run a publicity campaign for it that we could never have even paid for. So when a book gets canceled, it's great publicity. However, up to a point. And things like with the Mattingly book that we were just talking about, Simon and Schuster's decision not to distribute that book. Oh, we didn't publish that book. We probably would not have published that book. But it shows that now that is the first time that I'm aware of that a distributor has said, we will not distribute somebody's book if we don't like it. And there are lots of people who don't like the books that Regnery publishes. And that makes me nervous. And the walls are closing in,
Yeah.
And we've crossed various lines recently, since January, that had never been crossed before. Amazon removing Ryan Anderson's book on transgender. Ryan Anderson is a good friend of mine. The book is here on my shelf right now. I've read that book. The stated reasons for canceling that book were preposterous. And yet Amazon is now going to start picking and choosing. People say, well, they're a private company, that's their right. I guess so. I'm not questioning that, but that's the cancel culture. And they've started, there's been some other titles canceled lately. So that makes me nervous. I'll cancel my books up to a point, please. But when it comes to distribution, if they stop distributing our books, that's going to be a big problem for us and for lots of other people.
But Thomas, what I'm hearing is almost two sides of logic that can kind of be taken when convenient. One is the ideological side of the argument, which is, everybody should, cancel culture is bad. Everybody should have an opportunity to publish, to say what they, to say something. But then there's also like the free market logic where we say, well, it's good for business, right? So I guess, at some level, sorry, please go ahead.
My statement that it's good for business is tongue in cheek. I mean, that is along the lines of saying there's no such thing as bad publicity. Yeah.
Well, let me ask my question in a more pointed way. Is the letter actually a free market vote? is this the publishing house is actually saying we see market opportunity by making this sort of announcement and not publishing these authors? Like if we're really talking as business leaders in the publishing industry, is this letter actually like a calculated move to say, actually, this is going to help us sell more books or help our brand and help justify
I'm sorry,
the existence?
which letter? Which letter?
Sorry, the blacklisting letter, the no book deals.
No books for traders?
Yeah.
Well, I should clarify that letter was not issued by publishing houses. That was written by some, I can't remember his name now, some guy, no disrespect intended, but a nobody, not an important person in the publishing industry. He's written some books, and 500 people, self-described publishing professionals, signed on to it. You can go down the list, and I looked at a lot of the list. Most of them give their professional affiliation, and many of them give their title. This was not, by and large, people at high levels in publishing houses. There were one or two that I saw. For the most part, these were people had titles like, assistant auxiliary editorial intern, or something like that, like fairly low. These were for the most part young people, which I thought was interesting in itself. It's a generational thing in my experience. And now, so Random House or Simon & Schuster did not issue this letter saying we won't publish any from the Trump administration. And as you know, Simon & Schuster signed Vice President Pence up for a book a week or two ago. But nor was there any word of condemnation from anybody higher up at any of these publishing houses saying, some people from our company signed that letter. We'll respect their free speech to do, their right to do that, but that does not speak for Penguin or Random House. There was, as far as I know, no major publishing house condemned the sentiments in that letter, which I think is shameful.
That is super interesting. And you did in your op-ed make the delineation that these were very junior publishers. And in many ways, it actually is more concerning because these junior people are the future of the industry. Mm-hmm. And if their own publishing houses, their places of employment are not, say, kind of, for lack of a better term, coaching them on the value of free speech. And look, you can disagree with someone all day long, but and definitely in my experience, if you want to squash an idea, you got to give it more light. You want to elevate an idea, tell people they can't have it, right? They're almost putting the ideas that they disagree with on a pedestal by making them worthy of such a block, which is unfortunate, actually.
Yeah, I thought it was the letter made me sad, in a way, because one of the things I enjoy particularly about my professional life, now that I'm an old guy, having survived this long, is giving the professional formation to the young people that are coming in, and training them, mentoring them, whatever you want to call it. But I was telling you when we were chatting before the show began, I was telling you about that law firm that I worked at early in my career. The people who lavished attention on me, just giving me professional formation, I'm eternally grateful to them. I learned so much, and I still call on what I learned there to this day. They don't seem to be doing that with these young assistant editors or assistant marketers or assistant whatever at Random House and Simon & Schuster and Macmillan. They're letting them say things that are foolish, wrong, and shameful. And you know what? Young people often say things that are foolish, wrong, and shameful. I did. And that's one reason you have older colleagues is to help you. You know, same reason you have parents.
Yeah.
And I but that's, as far as I can tell. I mean, I don't work at Random House, so I don't know. But I don't see any sign that kind of professional formation, that handing on the traditions of this ancient and noble profession of book publishing is happening. Instead, you know what's happening is the old folks there are cowering. They're terrified of a revolt by their junior staff. It's happened before in the last few years. I promise you that's why Simon and Schuster said we're not going to distribute that book last week. It's not that somebody was losing sleep over distributing that book. It's like, oh my God, the word has got out and we're going to have a riot on our hands.
What I love about what you're saying is you're now turning the spotlight away from issues of politics or these kind of topical things. What we're talking about now is a professional decorum, professional standard of where your colleagues, your contemporaries are a little bit potentially asleep at the wheel in sort of codifying the value system of publication, right? Like, this is a profession. We have standards, and it's a very interesting indictment of some of the senior executives at these other publishing houses, not necessarily for whether they sign the letter or not, but like not mentoring their junior staff, the future of the industry, to say, hey, look, you don't need to be scared of ideas. You don't need to be scared, and I think that's super interesting. I want to talk about where we go as a country from here. And I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on, like, how can we improve dialogue in this country? There is a lot of vitriol on both sides of the aisle right now for each other. Sometimes it feels like we're just yelling at each other, talking past each other, not actually speaking with each other. So I'm curious. Let's start off with this question: are there any authors, both conservative or liberal, that you feel are part of the solution? They're actually speaking to the other side in productive ways that our audience can go out and support those authors because they're actually part of the solution of helping us talk with each other.
Yeah, I mean, I think there are many. The problem is not that there's nobody willing to talk to the other side. I think I'm willing to be corrected on this, but my view, my best guess as to what's happening is that structures or the channels of communication, the way that we can communicate now, are not designed to have a meeting of the mind, right? They're designed to have a brawl. And Twitter, just to give you an example, but I would say on the conservative side, people like, I don't know, one of my favorites is Rod Dreher, who's an old friend of mine. He blogs, he's written books. He's the author of The Benedict Option, a new book now called Live Not by Lies. Yeah, he's great, although he's headed to Budapest till July on some fellowship. So when he comes back, you can get it. But he's very interested in talking, and I think he's very effective at it. Ross Douthat is probably an obvious example. He's a conservative columnist, still has his perch at the New York Times. Every day I check to see if he's still there. Another favorite one of mine is R.R. Reno, Rusty Reno, the editor of First Things. Regnery's published a couple of books by him. His book, The Return of the Strong Gods, which is his attempt to explain basically where Trump came from or what he represents, that the movement that he represents is incredibly intelligent and insightful, and is not just preaching to the choir. He's trying to explain to everybody what's going on here, why we should all pay attention. and what we should be concerned with, what we should welcome. On the left, my favorite example of a liberal writer who really tries to reach the other side is Alex Behrens, who the former New York Times reporter. And I have had a fascinating personal journey with him since last September. He wrote this book, Tell Your Children, about marijuana. Not the standard liberal line on the question of legalizing marijuana. It's a great book. That was published, I don't know, 2 or 3 years ago by Free Press.
Free Press, yeah.
Mm-hmm. He's been writing about the pandemic, tweeting and whatever else for quite a while, and people, the number of things that I know for sure about the coronavirus pandemic would fit in a thimble, right? But he has been trying to look at it dispassionately and say, are we following the science, really? And has been sharply condemned mostly by his fellow liberals. I met him here in Washington last September when he was here for a conference, and said, you ought to write a book on this, and you ought to publish it with Regner. And he was very polite, basically like, well, as you know, I am a former New York Times reporter, and we don't publish with people like Regner. But we developed a friendship, and I kept at him, and he saw that nobody else was probably going to publish him, and that I convinced him, because it's true, that I wanted his book because I think he's trying to tell the truth about them. He may be right or he may be wrong. He may be partly right, partly wrong. I don't know. But he is a truth seeker. And that's rare these days. And we eventually signed him up. He's writing the book for us. He took the plunge, and we'll see how it goes. But I think he embodies everything that is finest in the liberal intellectual tradition of, let's look at the evidence, let's hear the arguments, and let's decide.
Well, let's have them on 99 pages. Right on. I'm excited for that book. And actually, one of the books on your website that does intrigue me, The Price of Panic, that you picked up, how the tyranny of experts turned a pandemic into a catastrophe. Also, a similar thesis of how we may have taken scientific evidence and misinterpreted and misapplied it throughout the course of this pandemic reaction, which I think is actually also very interesting, and certainly a topic that should not be blacklisted, right? These are conversations that we need to have, right? The more attention that we give to these ideas, the better. I'd love to ask you a question that I did not brief you on, and I hope you don't mind me. But I just got to ask it from a personal level. What is it like to be the publisher of an Ann Coulter book? And the reason why I ask that is because, I personally, I don't really care, one way or the other, but to me, it's so interesting because, I've not actually read her books. I'll be completely honest. She's one of the few authors I honestly just have not read. I read a lot. I'm not actively avoiding her work, but I just haven't read it. But I see her persona on TV and the provocative things she says. And I'm just curious, from your seat at the helm of your publishing company, when you have an author with such a provocative persona, what is that? How does that affect your heartburn? What is that? How does that help or hurt you? And I'm just curious, what happens?
Well, I have perhaps an anticlimactic answer for you.
Okay.
You asked me, what is it like to be the publisher of Ann Coulter? And the accurate answer is, I don't know, because I was not the publisher when
I see.
we published her last books, and I didn't work on them. Ann Coulter started out at Regnery. Then she was lured away by the satanic forces with all their money in New York. And she went to New York and published her next several books there. And she came back to Regnery not long after I came on myself. I've been there 8 years. And as I said, until about a year and a quarter ago, I was an editor. I didn't work on her book. But I'll try to give you an answer to that question. Ann Coulter is brilliant. I mean, her style is not something that everybody appreciates. And there are plenty of people who are extremely provocative on the right and the left. I mean, Ann Coulter has not cornered that market, but she's very smart. And if you read her book, the most recent one we did with her was called Adios America. It was about immigration. And people have, obviously very different views on what this country's philosophy of immigration should be. And my own views are, they change from time to time. So I don't mean to suggest that I sign on the dotted line with everything that Ann Coulter says about it. I don't know that I do at all, but it's an intelligent, powerful argument. So, yeah, my own deepest satisfaction as a publisher comes from books like Rusty Reno's that I was talking about, the Return of the Strong Gods, or Alex Berenson. That's where I think we have the greatest contribution to make. But not everything is my decision, and we do need to sell books, and provocations sell. So yeah, if I wanted to publish only things that I like myself, I could have my own publishing house. And as I told you before we started, I did one. And it is now only a memory. So,
oh man, provocation sells. I actually fully agree with you. I don't necessarily subscribe to everything Ann Coulter says, but when I really look at just the flat text of some of the things she says, it's interesting how she can create a provocative, visceral emotion from thoughts that are actually relatively benign. She's extremely gifted at that. And one of my favorite examples is her quote, which on the surface sounds abhorrent, which is America would be better off if women didn't have the right to vote. And what she's actually trying to say, and I think there's a reasonable argument to it, is that sometimes if women's rights are ubiquitously held as the domain of the left, it is very likely and possible that women sometimes are voting against their self-interest in the long run. Totally reasonable argument to make. But the way she says it to provoke the discussion is, it just stabs people in the heart, one way or the other. It provokes, and it's a work of marketing genius that I will probably never master. Tom, we're running out of time here, so I want to ask you two last questions. The first question is, what are the questions? I'm a member of the generation coming up, and I'm not necessarily in the publishing industry, but I care very deeply about publications. I care deeply about reading. What are the questions that I didn't ask you that I should have asked you? What are some of the topics that I did not get to that you're like, hey, actually, Rajiv, if you care about this, this is where your eyes need to be?
Good question. I wasn't expecting that question about questions, not questions. I guess, well, give within the topic of this interview, which free speech in a divided nation. To me, the big question, the question you didn't ask maybe, and I'm not sure that I would have had an answer, is where is this going? I mean, we touched on that a little bit. I said, we've crossed several lines recently. Simon & Schuster has canceled a book. And then Amazon started removing books, not selling books because of ideological judgment. Now a major distributor has said it will pick and choose which titles it will distribute. We're all waiting to see what is next, and our future. This is why Josh Hawley's book is particularly of interest to me, because our future is in the hands of a few very big, very powerful tech companies, right? Nobody's in a business more old-fashioned than Greg, which is printing books printing on paper and selling it. People to, hold and look at. I'm, an old-fashioned business, that's for me. But it is completely controlled now. It's all in the hands of major tech companies. Amazon being just the most obvious. But there. Oh, another line we crossed was when Amazon Web Services canceled Parler's, whatever social media service. So when somebody going to cancel Regnery.com? And I don't want to show my hand to my enemies exactly, but I don't know what we would do about that, right away if that were to happen to us. And maybe less than a year ago, I would have thought it was a silly question to spend time thinking about. Now, I don't.
Wow.
And lots of other people don't think so either. So
it's interesting because instinctively, we read these like extremely well thought out corporate statements on why these actions are made, and it's interesting that the slippery slope is somewhat invisible, and I can see from your perch why these topics are absolutely in the back of your head. And much of our following works in tech. I myself work for a Microsoft company where this is the ecosystem I've chosen to live in, and the perspective that you brought today was exceptionally valuable. Thank you for opening our eyes to it.
Yeah, and I don't mean to condemn tech in a blanket way. I mean, Amazon, publishers always gripe about Amazon, but Amazon enabled my little publishing company that I once had to exist, and the same with Regnery. I mean, what Amazon has done to break open the market for all kinds of books is astonishing, and which makes it painful to see them thinking about backing away from that.
Well, I tell you what, these are absolutely questions that you got me watching, and I don't think you actually threw them under the bus that much. I think you just made an honest assessment of the market from your seat, which you're absolutely entitled to do. Last question before we sign off, sir. What are you reading now?
I'm reading, because I'm a very scattered thinker. I'm always reading a whole bunch of different things. What I'm reading now is fairly random, or it will seem random to some people. I'm reading a book called The Literary Art of Edward Gibbon, which was written. It was published in 1960, the year I was born, and it's written by an English professor of mine in college, whom I venerated. Who was one of the greatest professors I ever had, and this was originally his doctoral dissertation that was eventually turned into a book, and I stumbled across it thanks to big tech. I was fooling around on whatever book, ABE books, and I found this copy that he had even signed, and I got it, and I'm reading it, and it's absolutely fascinating. It's the story of how Edward Gibbon came to write The Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire, and it's one of the monumental works of the English language and of the historical profession, and it's a fantastic book, and
Great recommendation.
I'm reading that, and I'm also finishing up actually this Alex Berenson's "Tell Your Children," the marijuana book, which is excellent too. Those are the two things I'm reading right now.
Well, that's fantastic. I appreciate the recommendations. We got a lot of them from you today. Hey, sir, this, Thomas, I got to say, conversations like this have the potential to be emotional, have the potential to be personal. I just want to thank you for just coming on, letting me ask you some tough questions, bring in your whole self, and just letting the ideas flow. It meant a lot to us. I know it meant a lot to our viewers. We had a lot of engagement today, and so and a lot of gratitude from the audience. So thank you again for coming on.
I appreciate it. This was a lot of fun. And great questions, and thank you to the audience who tuned in. Yeah, we need more of this. So keep it up.
Right on. All right, 99 Pages Club. That's all for today. We're going to be back in 2 weeks with Lead Yourself First by Mr. Mike Irwin. It is his publication on leadership in the new generation. He's actually one of my former mentors from the Army, from West Point, recently published by Bloomsbury. And we're going to go and have a great discussion on leadership with him. Jim Collins wrote The Back Flap. I mean, it is a great book for us to